Welcome to Relancer podcast, where we talk about talent acquisition topics. I'm Eero, the co-founder of Relancer, the platform where employers connect with on-demand recruiters. I'll be your host, and this is our first episode. Today we have Ellis, and we're talking about data-driven recruiting process. Welcome, Ellis.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, what have you been up to lately? Like, what have you been doing?
Last year or so, I've been doing a lot of contracting work with a bunch of different companies, from like internal placements to a couple different times that I've spun up, an entire applicant tracking system. But before that, I was at a company called Triplebyte that was a talent acquisition platform for software engineers to be able to take technical assessments and be able to basically demonstrate that they could do what they say they could do, and for companies to then be able to engage them on that platform. So I'd say that's been the last since about 2019. So the last 5 years or so has been those two things.
Okay, and how did you become a recruiter? Like,
how did I become a recruiter? I like to say that I became a recruiter the same way that many of the rest of us did, and that's by accident. I was sailing. Once upon a time, I used to race sailboats professionally, and during a couple amateur races, at the end of the day, the skipper said, "You're quick and you're smart. Do you want a job?" And little did I know that he was basically the second in command for the talent transformation that JCPenney was going through at the time, and this was a little bit more than 10 years ago now. That's how I got in to be an associate recruiter, which is a glorified name for a sourcer at JCPenney Corporate.
yeah, it's quite funny. Like every time I talk with somebody, nobody says that I was a little boy or girl. I dreamed becoming a recruiter. Everybody's
Not
like,
many of us.
"Oh, this is the story how I become like it's accident. Like somehow I
Yeah.
ended up into that." I was also before we started. I was thinking like, why is it? I was thinking maybe the recruiters is something behind the scenes because it's not
Kind of.
a public face. Maybe nowadays it is like, but in the past you wouldn't see any like public recruiters. So before LinkedIn.
Well, yeah, that's definitely true before LinkedIn, but that's before my time at least. My hypothesis is that it requires a lot of the same skills to be a recruiter as it does to be a salesperson, and salespeople are typically much better compensated than recruiters are. And so I think a lot of the people with those skills that have those natural talents end up in sales because they're chasing dollars. And it's like the hypothesis of my career that if I stick it out in recruiting, that it makes it easier to get to the top of the food chain because a lot of the best people out there actually end up in sales. I also think it's until relatively recently, recruiting has been a bit of an afterthought. Like it's something that you might see it as a function of HR, but it's probably just the hiring manager doing their own thing or like working their own network, especially pre LinkedIn. And this is me getting before where I have hands-on experience, but where I know a lot of people that were in the space at that time. It was mostly like you post a job wherever it was, jobs were posted, you got inbound from that, then you figured out who you were going to make an offer to, and they accepted that offer. And then LinkedIn was a game changer in that it made it a lot more focused on outbounding and on going after specific clients or candidates rather than going after just kind of whoever it was that came in.
Yeah. And I also did some snooping around. So
Oh yeah,
I
what'd you
went,
find?
I went to your LinkedIn profile and I was like, I found that you were a DJ and a producer, and I was thinking, okay, this is super interesting. I would like to like hear more about what is the story behind this, like your first job, at least at your profile at LinkedIn.
Yeah, sure. The way that I got that job was literally walking down the street in San Francisco, and I was going to a buddy of mine's place at the time, and I was like 16 or 17, and this girl was sitting outside a cafe and said, "Hey, we're having some live music here tonight. You guys should come." It was me and a couple friends, and it was literally across the street from my buddy's place. So I figured, like, if it sucks, I can just go back to my buddy's house. And so when I actually turned up to check it out, she was like absolutely mind blown that I actually came to see the music, and it turns out that that was a Pirate Cat radio, and so it was like half coffee shop, half radio studio with a window that ran between the two of them. And so by the end of the show, I was like in the studio. She was calling me her producer. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and I'm coming back regularly, and she gets fired, and so it's just me, and so Monkey, the guy that ran the studio, said like, "Well, guess this is your show now." And that's how I initially got into it. And it's funny, I actually kind of kept in touch with Monkey. There's probably about 10 years that we were out of touch for him. And when the wildfires rolled through California, particularly Santa Cruz in 2020, he had a radio transmitter set up there that burned to the ground. And so posted on Facebook saying, and tagged me in it saying like, "Hey, does anyone want to go outside and build a radio station for me?" And so that's what one of my pandemic projects was building a radio station in Santa Cruz in California, for those that not familiar with the area.
But when it burned down, you were still working in the radio station, or?
Yeah. I mean, I hadn't worked in radio in a long time at that point. I've done a lot of like event production in an entirely separate life, but not entirely separate, but mostly separate life. And so I was still familiar with how to do all the things. But Pirate Cat was probably my first step into event production, which is something that I'm still extremely passionate about. But it. I hadn't like actively worked in radio for a long time at that point. Although it's interesting, the stats on radio in the U.S. It's a shockingly sticky medium for something that people consider to be outdated. It's like 70 or 80% of Americans listen to like over-the-air broadcasted radio on a weekly basis.
Yeah. I do hear in the radio in Estonia where there is like job boards are still like using radio as to outreach to candidates. So
it's wild. It's wild how much that still happens, where I think people think of it as this like anachronistic art form, but it's still like shockingly relevant. It's definitely not the cutting edge, obviously, but it's still a shockingly relevant medium.
Yeah. So let's try slowly move to the topic. So what is your experience with data in recruitment?
Yeah, so a lot of my career that isn't just like getting on the phone with candidates and talking to them, and even then, a lot of it's data driven, has been focused around having a data driven process, and something that isn't just like I feel like this should work. Sure, that might be where you start out a process if you're first building something from the ground up. It's going to be based around like here's kind of what I think would work based on my gut feelings, and then after that like very first step of like doing that, then you go out and like start to track stuff and get validation for it. But I feel like having a data driven process makes a much more scalable process. It allows you to be much more of a force multiplier. It allows one person to get a lot more done than they might otherwise have gotten done, because they are figuring out where those efficiencies are in an empirically provable way. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot that you could go into there for like what the experience is on a particularly data driven thing. But I think it just being analytical and data driven needs to be something that permeates all of your recruiting experience.
And what's your experience today? Like, are the teams in recruitment, most of the teams, are they data driven at the moment, or it's not the standard?
Not really, no. There's a lot of hand waving around. So having owned a recruiting agency and worked on a customer facing side of recruiting tech platforms, I've spent a lot of time talking to teams and hearing what it is that they do. And it's not necessarily phrased exactly like this, but there's a lot of conversation that at a high level ends up being me saying, "Hey, what's your best practice around XYZ thing?" Oh, it's this. Why is it that? Because it works. How do you know it works? And then the hand waving starts of like, "Oh, well, we wouldn't be successful as we are if we didn't know that it works." There is no like, these are the KPIs that we're measuring. Here's why we're measuring them. Here's how we're measuring them. And here's where were you want to use you to tweak that, or where we want this product to move the needle, or where we want this product to how we're going to rate what the measures of success are for XYZ thing. You don't really hear that. You hear a lot of like maybe high level like time to hire, cost per hire that people might track, but when it gets down into more granular stuff, it's something that most recruiting teams think that they're a lot better at than they actually are.
So you could say that it's important to be data driven. So one thing you mentioned to be scalable, of course, to make real decisions, not only on the like gut feeling. Is there anything else why it's important to be data driven that we haven't covered yet?
It definitely will remove biases, or at least uncover them. If you're recording things in some way, it might be like a particular interviewer that needs some interviewer training. It might be a particular interviewing module. If you've got the volume for it, it might be even a specific question within an interviewing module that needs some cleanup, or like is particularly knocking people out, and you maybe do a retro on that and decide that it's not actually knocking out the people that you want to knock out, or as an experiment you push some people through even though they should have been knocked out by whatever thing it was, and you see that they do better later on down the line, which like unvalidates that that's something that should be knocking people out. But bias, I use that as a very broad definition of the term. I'm not just talking about like gender bias or racial bias or something like that. I'm talking about biases against different personas of like not protected classes that are not necessarily people that you'd want to bias against. Or if you are going to bias against a particular profile, you want to be doing so deliberately and have a particular outcome that you're looking for there. Again, obviously not biasing against any kind of protected class or anything like that. It might be that you're talking about a software engineer that has some amount of experience with data science, or particularly has been far away from data science, so they're looking at it with more fresh eyes. That might be a good example of a bias that you want to be explicitly aware of if you have it.
So you already mentioned some of the, like, I would say essential and key metrics, KPIs, like time to hire, cost per hire, but you mentioned also that they are all not always maybe the most important metrics. Like, what are the most important ones for you?
Those are important metrics, right? Time to hire is really important. To time average time in each step of the process. Like when you get more granular down to how you want to break time to hire down from just like the moment the job rec opens to the moment that somebody starts, right? Like there's a bunch of steps in between here and there, and a bunch of stages in between here and there that you want to collect data on. I find that it's easy to get myopic about like cost per hire and time to hire specifically. Like, if I'm the VP of finance, I'm going to see a cost per hire going up and say like, why is that happening? We want to spend less money, not more money. And so there's some other metrics that you want to think about to like have some reasonable and constructive pushback there, like quality of hire metrics. For example, it's a common pushback that you'll get from finance when you want to offer like a high referral bonus, for example, and because that increases your cost per hire significantly. But if you look at the average tenure of a referral versus, so the top of any funnel, and this is a bit of an oversimplification, but the top of any funnel is inbound, outbound, and referrals. And if you look at referrals for most industries at most sizes and stages of companies, on average, you're going to see more than a year longer tenure than the other two channels that you have people coming from. And so if you consider that for the overall impact of the cost of the hiring process and not that particular single price per hire, that's a pretty good metric to think about in terms of quality of hire, to give pushback against finance and say, hey, look, if we don't need to spend this money on another hire for another year and a half after the average of when we'd have to anyway, we're lowering the overall cost, average cost per hire, even if this one cost per hire increases. You could look at quality of hire. It's a metric that is a bit of an oversimplification that I like to look at. That's easy to set up, like at somewhere quite early stage. That is what I like to call a new hire NPS. That 90 days after a new candidate starts, or a new employee at that point starts, you talk to the hiring manager and you ask on a scale of 1 to 10, how good a fit are they? And you talk to the candidate and you say on a scale of 1 to 10, how good a fit are you? And so that gives you like an NPS to work with for how well that worked. Now, ideally, this isn't going to be true of absolutely everything that you're rating as a part of the interview process. There's going to be parts of the interview process that have different functions besides like long-term skills, and the skills that somebody needs are going to change significantly over time, particularly at an earlier stage startup. But if you can have performance reviews linked to what is being assessed as a part of the interviewing process, linked to what the hiring manager and hiring team is defining at the start of the interview process, so all of that talks to each other, that does a good job of telling you like, are you testing for the things that you want to test for? And you might end up with a slower hiring process that's more expensive and that takes more of non-recruiting's time to focus on that interview process. But if you're seeing these average hire performance reviews come through as a metric that I think you should care about here, or if you're seeing say tenure be longer, or whatever other KPIs that you want to start to measure to validate this process as being a good process that is getting you quality candidates, that's a really good way to not just focus myopically on like time to hire, cost per hire, which is where everybody first really focuses on.
Yeah, quality of hire is in a way super interesting because like in general it means like you said, how good is the candidate, like skills it brings to the team, how long they stay. So basically, even if the process becomes slower and it seems the cost goes up, like if the person stays 1 year more, that actually lowers the cost of hire. Like, but
Exactly.
you don't see it so quickly, or it's not so transparent.
Right. I mean, these are things that become the more complex the metrics you're trying to track here, the more difficult it is to do at an earlier stage startup. Not just because of the volume, but because of the like how much that company is going to evolve over time. You could look at even like other metrics that you might want to track of like how much is this person a champion of the values of the company? How much are they a social leader that drives morale within the company? Like, how much are you able to select for that within the interview process? Like, how do you rate that first off, like later on down the line, which is where like HR and recruiting would need to work together pretty closely to think about how to rate that. And then what are you going to do to try to assess that metric while you're predict that metric as a part of the recruiting process? Like those things start to become much more difficult to do and require larger companies with more data. If you're not like, Series D and beyond company or Series E and beyond company, that's going to be a pretty hard metric to try to go after, even if it's an important one to care about.
Yeah, I'm also thinking that like it's very known that okay, you have like source of hire, where does it come from, how much time it takes, what is the cost, like what is the quality, but probably one of the most underrated KPI maybe is like candidate experience, because at least I feel that most of the recruiters think about it as like hiring as like how much it costs, like in a financial perspective, but basically the candidate experience has impact also to your employer brand. It will also have like a bigger and longer lasting effect on all of the metrics. Like,
So these other things to think about too, right? And there's some ways to measure that. Like, so I found that it's very difficult if somebody doesn't end up with an offer to actually get any meaningful information out of them for what their candidate experience was. I think that there's some data that you can get in like closing up at the very end of the process with somebody, the end of an onsite or virtual onsite or whatever you want to call it. Being able to sit down and have a like, how did we do today? Are we stacking up as a company versus the other companies that you're interviewing with? You can get some data there. It's hard to make it structured. You can make it kind of structured. I find that, so in general, I think you should be thinking about this process the way that a PM thinks about creating a product. And part of that is not just like the functionality, but the user experience that somebody's going to have as a candidate in this process. And if there's ways that we can figure out how to get user feedback from candidates in more structured ways than not, that's great. There's some tools out there that help with that. There's a tool that I like a lot called MetaView that is kind of like Gong, but for recruiting specifically versus sales. But I think candidate experience is crucial, especially for closing candidates and like having people want to work at your company. And so coming up with a way to measure that and to try to pull levers to go after producing a quality candidate experience is hard. It's quite hard, but it is something that is super important to go after in as data driven a way as possible.
Yeah, I agree. It's like it's quite hard to get feedback from the candidates if they don't have like good experience. They don't want to
Right.
invest more time like on that side, but you can still measure what you are doing, like how long it takes for you to answer the or recruiter to answer the candidates, how they move in the process. So there are many things that you basically can measure what you as an organization are doing. Like,
Yeah, offer acceptance rate is a decent one, right? Like that's going to be pretty. That's the half the point of the candidate experience overall is getting them to accept the offer at the end of the process. And so if you have a high offer acceptance rate, it's very likely that you have a good candidate experience. And trying different things and seeing how that impacts your offer acceptance rate, it can definitely help validate that. But chasing one single metric there versus having a scope of them that you can go after. Whenever you're chasing a single metric anywhere, you're at danger of getting trapped in Goodhart's law and having creating some perverse incentive structures somewhere to close a candidate and then to call that a good candidate experience, which may or may not be true. A good example would be if you just start throwing oodles of money at offers, you'll probably have a high acceptance rate, even if you have a shitty candidate experience. And so you don't necessarily you rarely want to tie all of one kind of meta level goal to just one single metric.
so let's move on. Like, so how would you start like collecting data? Like nowadays, like a lot of the applicant tracking systems have something built in, but there are like other sources of data. Like how would you like set it up? What are the places and then so on? Like,
Yeah. So ATSs these days, you're right, has some good data collection in there for you to be able to track stuff. Now, you have to have a decent implementation of that applicant tracking system to be able to do that, right? Like if you're going to do things like have structured data in feedback forms versus just like all kind of longhand written stuff, that is something that you need to set up when you're configuring your ATS, and you can't just have it be like, okay, here's an ATS, it works and does the thing, right? There was a company I used to work at, Atrium, that we implemented like a scoring system for the recruiter phone screen, where we had each question have a 1 through 4 score associated with it, and then a multiplier on it for how important we thought that question was. Is where we ended up getting to. And then once we started collecting enough data and seeing like, A, does this correlate with how people do downrange? And B, like, can we start to see where thresholds are? And that started to be some good and useful data. But that needed a pretty robust configuration of that applicant tracking system and needed a pretty significant amount of extrapolation from there. I find that there's some of the newer ATSs out there. I'm a particular fan of Ashby that does a good job of getting you away from like the Franken tech stack of recruiting tools out there and has like everything talking there. But Ashby does require quite a lot of configuration to take advantage of that. I'd say in terms of starting collecting data, you want to look at like what stuff is going to be highest leverage. Like A/B testing outbounds and getting high impact at the top of the funnel is probably going to be pretty high leverage and is going to be impactful towards saving you time and making you more efficient. That's not going to be like something super granular, like trying to rate somebody's social impact on it, living as the values of the company, as you are able to assess it through like one question in one interview module that they went through their interviewing process, right? Like that's super esoteric and it's something that is like way later on down the line and is not the place that you're going to start, right? You're going to start off with like A/B testing outbounds. You're going to start off with looking at uh, the job post that you have and the number of people that visit that post versus the number of people that apply. Which there's shocking things that you can do there, by the way, for like very quickly getting like a 200 or 300% jump. There's but that's getting a little bit into the weeds. But those are going to be like kind of the probably bigger top of funnel stuff that's going to be most impactful. And then from there you can start like measuring stuff that cascades off of that. But you're not going to start with like the super granular, super esoteric stuff.
So you already mentioned one of the things like, so you can use the data to make improvements, like 300%. That sounds super good. Like what else you can do with the data? Like how you can use it to improve?
So like I'd mentioned before, you should think about this the way that a product manager thinks about their product. So you want to induce some user behavior. So you want accepted offers. And so you want to create a new best practice. For example, I like to do what's called a gratitude circle for making an offer to somebody, where when they're getting the verbal offer, and not only am I making that offer, but everybody that they interviewed with is on that call to tell them why they felt like they were actually a good fit there. And not just like, hey, you check the boxes, so here's your offer, and is a nice like positive conclusion to what is a necessarily judgmental process. And so a great thing to do for say I implemented that is look at what the acceptance rate before and after implementing that is. It might be that was a terrible idea. I mean, it wasn't, and it really positively impacted the acceptance rate. But it might have been that was a really bad idea, and it might have been the acceptance rate went from 30% or 40% to 35%. And that's a small enough gap that, especially if you have a decent volume of offers going out, that's a small enough gap that, like, if you're not actually empirically measuring that data, you might not notice it. If you have some good way to visualize that, you might just say, like, well, it's about the same, so I guess we'll keep this as a best practice. There's probably a bunch of little things that you can do out there that are going to make that, like, 5 or 10% jump. It's not common that you see that like 300% jump where it'll be like patently obvious immediately. And even then, you probably want to measure, say you do get that 300% jump in click-through rate of somebody going to your jobs page versus somebody applying to a job. You want to probably measure the quality of candidate after that. How many of those people are what are the pass-through rates through each step in the pipeline after that? It might be that was a really bad idea and that all of those 300% more people that are applying are terrible and you don't want to talk to any of them. And so you should go back to the way that it was, because all you ended up doing was diluting your quality.
I think this is one of the maybe important things about data is that most of the improvements might have like a little change. So they don't have a big one and you don't feel it like, but in the end they add up. Like you make small changes in the process, and then in the end you gain a lot. But if you make those small ones, you don't measure it, like, and it can even become worse, but you don't know it.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that can show you actually what is going on. Like.
Right. I think it's easy to get trapped in, especially if you're an earlier stage company where you like, because your changes are so early on in the process, they will a lot of the times be like very big and very noticeable. And so I think that tunes you to think that like, oh, that's just what these changes are going to look like. Whereas, yeah, if you add, if you change your outbound copy to something that's way better, or you go from like, sending a random in-mail to like actually having a proper drip campaign, like all of a sudden you've got a whole bunch more people in the pipeline. Like, yeah, sure, that's going to make a really big impact, but most of the changes that you're ever going to make are not going to be of that magnitude.
So what are the common like challenges that organizations face when they transition to data-driven like approach?
Um, People not believing that it's a good idea. You often face a lot of pushback from people that just kind of want to keep doing what they've been doing because
Mm.
it's how they've always done it, and the cognitive dissonance that they experience from doing something different is like beyond what they can handle. And I find that like that stakeholder management, like kind of maneuvering through that in a way that it's very easy to get frustrated with somebody when they say like, no, I just want to keep doing it my way. I'm going to keep taking notes by hand because that's just the way that I've always done it and I always want to do it. It's very frustrating to hear that, and it's really easy to want to say like, no, fuck you. But that's never like the right way to communicate to someone, right? And so understanding how to definitely maneuver through that in a way that recognizes the uncomfortability and like the pain of the cognitive dissonance that somebody's having, which is something that we all experience as humans, is so something that you need to do, like managing people that are probably not your direct reports. And even if you are managing direct reports that are saying these things, it's probably not a great idea to be like aggressive and standoffish with them. It's going to be a good idea to meet them with empathy and to do things like show what doors this opens to them if they're able to do this. And if you all of a sudden see all of your colleagues getting access to a bunch of cool shit that you no longer that you don't have access to just because you're not using a system the correct way, and that is one of many incentive structures that you can create to get people to engage with that. That's I think one of the hardest things to run into, or people that maybe and this can be very valid pushback, that think that you're getting too granular too quick, and that you're letting perfect be the enemy of good, and you're trying to create this like brilliant system that is maybe way too cumbersome. And so I think often drawing a line of like, hey, look, here's the roadmap of where I want to get to versus where I am now. I don't expect us to be here. In fact, we're probably only going to be 80% of here before we raise our next round of funding or hit our next milestone that you want to hit or whatever. But make sure that it's clear that it's a lofty goal versus that you want to try to go after, versus like, this is what we're going to do and we're going to build this beautiful like cumbersome thing that makes everybody move slower and frustrates everybody and doesn't actually give meaningful data because there's not the right not a large enough volume pushing through, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, change is always scary, and it takes time. Of course, it's in the beginning. There is like additional work that comes with it, and what at least I have learned building a startup is that you have to start like small and keep it simple, and then you make it
Yep.
more complex, because in the beginning, like, you in a way have this feeling that you want to implement everything and then make it
Yeah,
like
yeah.
super like in depth, and have everything like, but there is always a question like, mm, what do we need at the moment, like what is important to track, like what can help us improve, and then always like everything doesn't have to be. That's why you said like the roadmap, it's very common with the product also, there is a roadmap, but today you don't build the Rome in one day, like, so you go step by step, you start building, and then that's probably the same with creating this data-driven recruitment process, that you start tracking at least something,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then you
exactly.
build on top of that. Like,
And as with any product roadmap, the larger you get, the longer the roadmap can get. But you still need to have agility there. There's going to be times that you have a hypothesis that you have for like this piece of data being impactful, or this KPI mattering, and it doesn't end up actually mattering. You end up being wrong, and you need to adjust what that roadmap looks like if you're testing these hypotheses, and you end up being wrong. And you can't just say like, okay, here's the perfect thing that we want to aim towards, that is this final goal that'll be success. You might be wrong about what that looks like. And in fact, if you have this final goal that you're envisioning, you're undoubtedly not correct in what it actually should end up looking like. It's undoubtedly going to end up looking like something different along the way. And building up some operational debt as a part of that process, if nothing else, if for no other reason than to discover where these pain points are, is totally reasonable and fine to do. And you shouldn't be trying to create this perfect system from the get-go.
so for the listeners, like, can you share some success stories, say so they know that it's worth going
Uh,
this road?
Sure. I think a good one is implementing the Rooney Rule for diversity recruiting, specifically for gender diversity on technical teams. For those of you not familiar with the Rooney Rule, it originated, I believe, from baseball in the United States, as it was racially integrating, that said that teams had to consider at least X percent of people from an underrepresented background. In terms of American baseball, it was black players. Before making a hiring decision. And I'll talk about specifically in gender diversity on the on technical teams. Though a thing to keep in mind is what underrepresented looks like is different team to team, and that you can't just like look at the whole company and say we're doing great on gender diversity when like stereotypically all of HR is female and all of engineering is male, right? Like that doesn't actually give you the level of granularity that you need to be able to make a reasonable insight. And in fact, there's interesting things that you should. We found too that like women tended to have a longer tenure than men did, which was funny when I was first digging into the data and seeing like, well, we hire more men, but we have like split gender across the company. How does that work? And like the only way that works is with an average longer tenure. But the Rooney Rule, as implemented, as the way that I implemented it, was basically X percent of people that made it to the on-site stage before making a hiring decision, or at least maintaining a balance at that percent. And what that doesn't mean is that you home run a couple people to the end of the process and say like, "Hey, look, we hit that percent," which in our case was 25%, or 30%, one or the other. It's been a hot minute since I've implemented this. But hey, we made it. The goal is to see that you actually see the same percentage of people at each step of the process. And when you do some analysis on that, you actually end up seeing some pretty interesting stuff. I found that women tended to accept offers more often than men did. I found that you want to see if there's like a drop off in the process somewhere, and if there is, like what's causing that drop off. And so if you don't record that data, if you don't track those kinds of things, you're never going to know like what to try to address in here to try to address any kind of diversity concern that you might have. It was something that I never got the opportunity to dig into to see like, hey, women were passing through the process at a lower rate than men were, but were accepting offers at a higher rate than men were, and had a higher average tenure than men did. Like, what do you do to try to address that? How do you try to make those things more equitable with each other? Like how do you ensure that this is a fair process that also results in you having a diverse team? There's more data that I wanted to dig into there that unfortunately that was at Triplebyte that no longer exists. So I did not have the opportunity to do that.
So I have a last question for you. It's gonna be a little bit out of the box. So usually people say fake it until you make it. But I was snooping on your LinkedIn and I saw something very interesting. You said fake it till you can fake it on a larger scale. Like, so what does it mean for you?
Yeah. So I think both fake it till you make it and fake it till you can fake it on a larger scale is in some ways speaks to imposter syndrome, right? Like I think we all have it. We all are sitting in rooms with people whose names we recognize at times, and we're starstruck, or we don't feel like we have the pedigree to be there, or whatever, or just too junior. And like I think you should like accept that feeling is just a part of humanity and lean into it. Like, don't fake it till you make it. Like, it's not like there's no end point where you're going to succeed. Like, you're going to keep getting that feeling as you keep moving up on the food chain, and like just keep increasing that scale that you're faking it at, because you're always going to feel like you fake it. You're never going to feel like you're. I at least have never felt like I'm the best ever, so therefore everybody should listen to me. I'm always going to feel like I've got some amount of imposter syndrome, and so I can, have some mythical end goal that I'm aiming for, or I can accept that there is in fact no end goal that you'll ever be able to meaningfully move past that, and it's just going to be something that sticks with you, and that you just kind of got to lean into it and not let that hold you back, and just try and do the absolute best that you can.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. So thanks for joining. Ellis.
My pleasure.
It was
Happy to be
fun.
here. Yeah, this was awesome.
So that's it for the episode 1 of Relancer podcast. If you like this episode, feel free to subscribe and share it. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope to see you in the next one.
I know I'll see you in the next one.